Welcome, everybody, back to episode 2 of our new weekly series, Closing Strong, with myself, Tara McGowan, founder and publisher of Courier, and my dear friend, Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles. We have such a great show for you guys this week. We are talking to both Congressman Ruben Gallego, who is running for the U.S. Senate in Arizona, as well as journalist and author and very strong vocal feminist Liz Plank. Simon, really excited to be back here with you. How are you?
I'm great, and I thought our first episode went really well. I've gotten great feedback on it. This is a lot of fun. And I also think that in the next few weeks, we're just going to see an awful lot of politics. We've got the debate next week. We've got early voting. Early in-person voting is beginning. Trump is going to get sentenced for his 34 felony counts. The Fed is probably going to cut interest rates. It's going to come at us now really fast and heavy. It's going to be an exciting time.
No slow weeks, no slow days. There's a lot going on and there's a lot to talk about. So as we love to do, and we know your super fans love to hear, why don't you start with just kind of giving us a breakdown of the state of the race, where it is right now. The polls are rolling out all over the place. I'm actually very curious. We can put a pin in it unless you get to it on your own, but I know that there is some debate around 538 in particular, and polls that have come out this week. But lead us through. What is the state of the race right now?
Yeah, listen, we should feel good. I mean, I would much rather be us than them is my bottom line on where we are right now. The vice president is ahead by 3 to 4 points nationally in the 538 averages now. The congressional generic, which is this question of, are you going to vote Democrat or Republican for Congress, has shifted about 3 points in recent weeks in our favor. We're now up there by almost 3 points as well. I mean, we're starting to see similar spreads between the congressional generic and her polling lead. In the battleground states, she has leads in the polling averages in 538 in 6 out of the 7 states. So we should feel good about that. And also in Nebraska, too, this little blue dot in the middle of the country where we're going to get one electoral college vote, the polling there. She's been leading outside a margin of error in all those polls. So the Senate polling continues to be very encouraging. Republicans continue to have down ballot struggles in many of these races, which can end up really dragging them down in the final few weeks. But I think in keeping with the spirit of this show, I think the real story for me this week is that we're slightly ahead. We've had a little bit of momentum, but the combination of our financial advantage, our organizational advantage, and now what is becoming a measurable intensity advantage. Gallup just released data showing Democrats having a similar level of intensity as we had in 2008, the highest level recorded really in the last several decades, that we have a huge 15-point gap, or advantage in intensity over Republicans, that when you push all those things forward over the next 2 months, it's far more likely that we win the election. It's not a guarantee. There's no prediction here, but we are going to be able to close much stronger than they will based on everything that we're seeing. And even this investment they're making in down ballot races is a sign that the campaign is, and like what Ruben Gallego will be talking about, is that the campaign is trying to reach out and grow its coalition and do everything it's possible to have as big a win as it can. And so I think the data we're getting on polling, on the voter reg numbers, which have trended in our direction, the fundraising, these are all the kinds of things that we looked at in 2022 that gave us an inkling that the election was going to be, that there was not going to be a red wave, and the election was going to turn out better than we thought. We're starting to see everything pointing in the same direction, and it's very encouraging for us. But of course, we have a lot of work to do in order to have the election we all want to have.
Yeah, no question. But the vibes are very good. And I want to talk about this kind of moment we're in where there is just an extraordinary offensive advantage that the Harris-Walz campaign has. And it feels that Democrats have right now, and folks that are part of this pro-democracy movement. But the campaign in particular, you touched on this. My jaw literally dropped when I saw the headline the other day that the Harris-Walz campaign was moving $25 million from their war chest to down ballot candidates. So Senate, House, and state legislative candidates and governor's races across the country. This has not been done in many cycles by a campaign. It demonstrates not only their financial strength right now, which we know is extraordinary because Vice President Harris has raised more than any presidential candidate online and with grassroots donations. It's been incredible to watch the past month, but also from a political standpoint, this is really smart politically for them to do this, not only to help ensure that Democrats win races up and down the ballot, but it's also a very savvy political move because it builds a lot of alliances and allies. And, as Vice President Harris very much didn't have a external political role to play, right? Or building a political war chest of her own. This was all a surprise for all of us, including her, that she would find herself at the top of the ticket right now, so close to election day. So I'm curious, kind of, did you have the same reaction to me when you saw
Yeah.
that?
I think it does another thing, Tara, is that it also starts getting Republicans asking Donald Trump about what they're doing for them. And because our party is unified, we're all working together. We're all on the same team. We are, expanding our coalition. Things are good internally in the family. The Republicans are a mess. The internal politics of their party is a mess. It's every man and woman for themselves. Trump is, lots of money is disappearing. We don't know where it's going. We're assuming it's going to legal bills, but they're not matching us on the air. We don't really know where their money's going. And so it also creates tension, I think, inside their party. It was also very strategically smart for that reason as well. And I will tell you that in DC this week, we're now back, right, from the Labor Day holiday. You can see a vibe shift going on in the DC based media and like The Hill and Politico. You're starting to see stories about Republicans panicking. And Politico had a big story on the Republicans panicking about the huge financial advantage that Democrats have that's getting bigger, by the way. It's not getting smaller. They're not closing the gap. And I think that one of the things a lot of these stories are missing is that that money translates not just into ads, but it also translates in the intensity that we're seeing, but also translates into grassroots support. We have more volunteers than we've ever had. We're knocking on doors and making phone calls right now in Rays and reaching out to voters at critical moments when they're still kind of checking into the race. We have the most powerful grassroots operation that the Democratic Party has ever had. And so I think in many ways, these articles that are just focusing on the media part of this are underestimating the real strength the Democratic Party has now. And you're starting to see it show up in these blind quotes from Republicans getting very worried about what they're seeing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with campaigns and fundraising for elections and campaigns, more is more is more. It means you can expand the map. It means you can bring on more volunteers. You can actually place more media. There is not really a ceiling in the way that our elections and our campaign finance works. You actually truly can do more and increase vote share and even expand the map. So it's really, it's an extraordinary move by the campaign. I was just so wildly impressed by the decision to do that. And we still have a number of weeks left to go. So more money will lead to more of that work. I want to dig in deeper on this kind of desperation that we're sensing. And you just mentioned in the Republican Party and in the Trump campaign. And I think with Trump himself that we're seeing if not as you know, in my opinion, most salient issue that is going to drive turnout among women, among young people, among all voters, frankly, is reproductive rights and freedom. It is abortion. And this past week, Trump made a number of interesting moves and decisions related to the issue of abortion. And so I think we want to watch a quick clip of something that he announced this week that created a bit of a wedge in his base, which I want to talk about a little bit.
I'm announcing today in a major statement that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for, all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women, IVF treatment.
So that's a pivot. As we know in Project 2025, which really is the Republican platform and the Trump platform, as much as he tries to say he's distanced from it, we know that that's not true. They would ban fetal personhood, which would ban IVF. We also know that Republicans in states like Alabama have already made moves in the courts and the state legislatures to try to ban IVF. This is wildly unpopular. And this statement, which is also an interesting take on it, which is that government will pay for IVF as a new position that Trump is lauding, is a pivot on this issue. And I think also just a strong indicator that he is really, really worried and knows that abortion could be the issue that loses him this election.
He should be worried because he's singularly responsible for stripping the rights and freedoms away of all the women of the United States. And it means that because of Donald Trump, women in this country have fewer rights and freedoms than women in virtually any developed country in the entire world now, and or even in many developing countries. I mean, women in Mexico and Brazil have more rights and freedoms than the women of the United States do today. So he's really right to be worried. I mean, we know that since Dobbs, there's been one basic election, in my view, that Democrats keep overperforming expectations. Republicans keep struggling. I think that's what's been happening since Dobbs. I think it's what's likely to happen in the next 2 months. And because I think that something broke inside the Republican Party when Dobbs happened. For a big chunk of the Republican Party, this was just a bridge too far. It was too much. The party had gone, this MAGA party had become dangerous and threatening. And so I think since Dobbs, he's right to be scared. I mean, one of the reasons Ronna Romney McDaniel was fired as RNC chairwoman is they just kept losing elections after Dobbs all across the country. And so he sounds, to your point that you raised, he sounds incoherent and wild and desperate and pathetic in many ways. It seems like something a weak and cowardly man would do who's losing an election. And so I do think this has been a very bad week for him because he's not going to convince anybody that he's gone, lefty on abortion issues, and he's pissing off his core pro-life base. And so I really do think we're seeing a candidate who is really struggling right now.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was going to say is like, this isn't going to win him new votes. He needs to protect the base that he has. And he's created a new wedge, especially with evangelicals and really, really, really strong pro-life people. They're really upset at that. And in the same week, he's inconsistent because he said that he would vote against the ballot initiative in Florida, his home state, that would protect the right to abortion. So it's true. He's just all over the place. And I think it does demonstrate his state of weakness. I'm excited to dig into this a lot more with our next guest later in the show, Liz Plank, an author and journalist who has been really at the forefront of kind of talking about the gender dynamics in this race, which we know are pretty historic. But first, let's hear from Congressman Gallego.
We're joined today by Ruben Gallego, Congressman Gallego, who's running a very spirited race for the U.S. Senate in Arizona, the battleground of all the battlegrounds, right? Ground zero in this 2024 elections. Ruben, welcome, and give us an update. How are things going out there?
Oh, gracias, Simon. Look, it's going well as possible. Look, we are a battleground state. It's going to be tight no matter what. There's a lot of very optimistic polling on my race, which is nice, but it's not where we are. But we are working everywhere and working every vote. And the reason I think we do have success, our polling does have us in a slight lead, is because we're not just talking to Democrats. We're not just talking to independents. We're talking to Republicans. We're talking to some of the reddest parts of Arizona. And we're also reaching some parts that just don't really ever get attention and that are Democratic areas. Some of our kind of, Native American communities that don't get any consistent outreach from Democrats until the last 2 weeks when we finally realized, like, oh my God, we need a couple thousand more votes. Or even the Latino community, where for many years the Democrats have taken advantage of, and we're making sure that we are talking to them consistently and understanding that there is a big community there and they have very different, feelings. And because of that, we now have more than 45 former elected Republicans and independents that are endorsing us. We have, more that are coming out, some, current elected Republicans that are coming out endorsing us. We have excitement wherever we go. We have the Latino community that feels that they're part of this election. It's great to go, and I live in a kind of what's called traditionally Latino neighborhood. So it's great to come out into my neighborhoods and see families come up to me and say how proud they are that I'm running and how their kids look up to me. And it feels great that I'm able to kind of show that, that this country, this world is part of their life now. And, we also have Republicans that are appreciating the fact that we're willing to talk to them, that we're willing to, come to a middle ground with them, even to the point where we, have found ourselves working with the police union. We have the largest police union endorsement in the state now. And, we're talking about how we can do better community policing together. So these are the things that, we've been doing now for almost 20 months. It's been a heck of an election, but we're doing the kind of work that you need to be doing every day, talking to voters, talking to community leaders, putting yourself out there. And I think that's what's showing in the results. And we have to, because you got to remember, Arizona still has 200,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. And so we have to build a coalition to win. You can't just win with Democratic votes in Arizona.
And just one question. How have things changed since the convention? You played a really major role at the convention. I was really proud of you. I was there that night,
Thank
not
you.
sitting too far away from you. It was not just your speech, it was also just what you did with your fellow Democratic veterans.
We were proud to wear the uniform, and we're proud serving our countries in city halls, state capitals, the U.S. House, and the Senate. These veterans represent the best of our country. We stand united as veterans, Democrats, and patriots to fight for everyone who serves.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought it was a really powerful moment in the convention and also a really interesting part of what became a remarkable Thursday night, right? Thursday night was an unusual night for Democrats in the way it was presented, a wonderful night, a powerful night, but also perhaps a little bit surprising. So talk a little bit about what your role was that night and how you think it all went.
So I spoke on Thursday night, a couple, 3 or 4 before the vice president, which shocked me too, to be honest. Like when you get involved in politics, you never think you're ever going to be doing stuff like that. But it also was very cool that I was able to talk about something that is very near and dear to me, which is being a veteran. And I think a lot of Democratic veterans really appreciate the fact that they got to see other Democratic veterans, because I think there's this stereotype that somehow all veterans are Republicans, and they're not actually. Most veterans are actually independent. And certainly there's a lot of Republicans, but there's a lot of Democrats. And I think the other thing that it answered to is that for many, many years, Democrats felt that it was unfair and also a self-inflicted wound that we didn't try to take the mantle of freedom, the mantle of patriotism, and talking about love for country. And I don't know why that is. I never felt uncomfortable doing that in my world. And I think largely because growing up in an immigrant community, surrounded by people that were, first generation Americans, or had just, had kids that are first generation Americans, it was very apparent that you love this country. It was odd if you met somebody in my Latino family that said, God, that had anything to say negative about this country. Obviously, there's things that we could fix, but like a true love for this country was always very natural for me. And whenever I entered into politics, it was odd when I met, people in Democratic politics were like, well, I don't know, we should really not go that far. We shouldn't be, being so jingoistic. And I was like, I never got it. And so I never, had to deal with that kind of issue, because I just kind of always ran my own lane and thought about, the medium voter, and the medium American voter is very patriotic, loves their country, loves veterans, wants to see the country do better. And I think you finally reflect that on stage, because I think that's where Democrats are. We love this country. We want to keep improving this country. And for that, the fact that we were able to kind of put a stamp on that, I think it was helpful.
Yeah, and Congressman, just kind of weaving those threads together, just this week, the late Senator McCain's son, Jimmy McCain, actually came out and said that he was changing his party affiliation and endorsing and voting for Kamala Harris in this ticket. And obviously the McCain family is a very big and prominent and well-known and beloved family in your home state. And it gets to your kind of early point about, as a true battleground state, you have to be talking to everybody and you have to be supported by folks on both sides. And there's an interesting tension, though, because as our newsroom in Arizona Copper Courier has covered very, very closely, you have a very right-wing state legislature in the state, and also a state Supreme Court. I know we're going to get into talking about reproductive freedom and rights, because that's such a salient and important issue in this election. But I'm curious kind of what that meant to you. Do you know Jimmy McCain? And he's also in the military, as I understand it. So what impact do you think that might have on some Arizona voters who might still be on the fence?
So I don't know personally Jimmy McCain, but of course, we have a lot of mutual friends. And I think the thing with the McCain family that people forget, it's not a Democrat, Republican, or independent thing. It's a service thing. And the reason people love the McCain family is because they look at them as the kind of premier public servants. This is a family of generational leaders, right? People that have served in government and or in the military for, ages. And whenever people talk about McCain, I think from the outside, they think about it kind of a maverick versus political. No, it's not that. It's what really endears people is the fact that there's a sense that they're always looking out for the best of this country. And so I think Jimmy McCain would have been respected being a Democrat or a Republican or independent because of that kind of selfless act. But it is it is a courageous thing that he did. It is not easy being a Democrat in Arizona. It's not easy being a Democrat in the business community like he is in Arizona. And it really tells you what's happening with the Republican Party, that you're chasing away such true conservatives to moderate men and women that are, I feel like they have to go to the Democrats because the Republican Party is no longer representing their values. And this is why it's important that we as a party really continue to have a big tent approach to who is in our tent, because the Jimmy McCains need to be able to fit into our tent because they really bring a perspective that we need. And again, it adds that profile that we are here as stewards of democracy, as defenders of democracy, and as patriots first and Democrats second.
That's right. And the final straw, I think, for him, right, because he hadn't come out and said he was going to vote Democratic before now, was the Trump campaign holding a campaign event at Arlington Cemetery. And that was just a bridge too far for him. Did you have thoughts on that event last week?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me. It's very personal for me. I have about 9 friends buried at Arlington, Section 60. And if you're a young guy and you have that many friends buried there, Arlington is very difficult to me to talk about Arlington. Let's just put that up that way. And it's very difficult when I see it get politicized.
Well, if I can just jump in and say, yesterday I did a podcast and my dog barked through a lot of it. Today we have your baby joining us today, Ruben.
Yeah, you get here in the background.
I know. It's the modern world of media that we all live in. And just wanted to give you a second to take a break there.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
And a moment of levity. And I feel the same way. I think we all do. I mean, Trump was, for a guy who continues to set the bar lower and lower, he set it as low as it can go last week. But let's move on and let's talk about something that I know you're really proud of, which is that you've run one of the most ambitious and aggressive campaigns geared towards the Hispanic community and Latino community that any Democrat has run in the last 20 years. I mean, talk a little bit about that. I know how proud you are. You've worked your butt off on that. And you've innovated. You've done a lot of very innovative stuff. I think our audience would love to know more about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits of growing up working class Latino is that we're the voting population of Latinos is we're working class. And a lot of times, a lot of outreach to Latinos comes from people that don't come from working class, right? Or never really grew up with working class Latinos, or are Latino, but kind of went to our Ivy Leagues and just kind of lost touch or never had touch. And I shouldn't talk shit because I went to an Ivy League, but I spent my most of my really until my 30s working mid 20s working with my hands, right? And so I did construction jobs, I worked at meat packing factories, I worked in restaurants, I did odd end jobs just to help my family kind of get along because we weren't exactly high up on the income scale. And I went to job sites with my cousins, so I know how to drywall all this stuff. And so I know what they're thinking in terms of politics, but also how to reach to them, because guess what? They're not watching CNN. They're barely going to pick up direct mail. And even Telemundo Univision, which is a very great medium, a lot of times they're not watching that either. And so you need to go to where they are. So I remember, for example, I would be working a construction site and we'd leave the construction site whenever we were done, especially working overtime, and we'd go right to the bar and watch a boxing match. That was a communal thing, right? And so because I'm a boxing fan still, I knew that, every around Cinco de Mayo and around September 16th, Mexican Independence Day, September 16th, and Cinco de Mayo, as you all know, a very famous boxer, middleweight champion, Canelo, has a boxing match. So, for my campaign, we rented out a boxing gym, sent out notices of that we're having a boxing watch party, put up Gallego signs everywhere, brought in a taco truck, and 300 Latino family members showed up. And we had an opportunity to talk to these men in a very non-confrontational political way about who I am and what I want to do, right? We did younger Latinos especially are very digital, right? So we did a food truck tour with a local food celebrity called Senor Foodie, and we went to all these food trucks, and they actually tried to punk me by having me eat cow's tongue. Thing they don't know is I grew up on a ranch for a little bit, so for those who grew up in a ranch, you eat everything that is edible on an animal when you kill it, right? And so they were very impressed that I was able to eat cow's tongue, cow's lips, and cow cabeza. But this is like the thing that we did that really got me attention with a lot of younger Latino people that just aren't paying attention to politics. Recently, we went to a rodeo. In Spanish, we call it jaripeo. Again, I grew up for a little bit on a ranch in Mexico, so I understand that culture very much so. But to really do outreach to them, we did instead of doing a normal palm card, we turned a very classic Latino family game called Loteria, and we put political symbols on there. And it's going like hotcakes now. So people actually are like emailing and texting people at the office asking for some of these cards and lawn signs and stuff and shirts now. So we're going to where they are, and we're making politics about them versus trying to make the politics about politics.
Preach, Congressman. Go where people are. Such a novel concept in our politics. It's really amazing. I know we don't have too much time left. I really want to ask just a question about the role of reproductive rights and freedom in your race in the election in Arizona. Arizona has been at the absolute front lines of this fight since the Dobbs decision. Your state legislature passed an effective abortion ban, and then your state Supreme Court went to uphold a total ban on abortion. That was from 1864. And I know that was overturned, but also there is a ballot measure that was citizen promoted in the state to be able, if it were passed, would protect the rights and freedom for reproductive access and reproductive health care. And, this is obviously a huge salient issue in states all across the country, but because your state has already seen the impacts of far right legislation and agenda related to reproductive freedom, what role do you think it's going to play in terms of turnout and also amongst, I'm very curious, the Latino communities in the state?
Well, among turnout, it's certainly going to help turnout. Women and men do not trust this legislature, right? Because they were perfectly fine when it was an 1864 outright ban, which was a mandatory 2 years sentence for any doctor or provider that provided an abortion, no exception to incest or rape. They were going to be perfectly fine with that if it wasn't for the huge public outcry that they finally repealed it, right? And so, we're not stupid. Arizona voters aren't stupid. They don't trust this Republican-led legislature that if the politics doesn't change, that they're going to go back to some very restrictive law. And of course, we see what happens in other states. And then you have politicians like Kari Lake, who said it was, a great decision. It was in terms of the, Roe v. Wade getting overturned. Said that it was a great law, the 1864 law, and that she's not willing to bend, in the words she said, on abortion rights. So voters are not dumb. They're going to go and protect their rights, young voters especially. And when it comes to what is one of the most important issues when it comes to Latinas, abortion rights. Every poll has abortion rights being the most important things for Latinas. And you got to remember, in Arizona, the average Latino age is 27. So we're a very young population in Arizona. And so for a population, a huge population of Arizona that is young, for their abortion rights to be taken away, in a state, by the way, that largely has always been fairly pro-choice. It's been a very libertarian freedom kind of state. And this new bent that's come from the right is not sitting well with, your Latina. It's not sitting well with your independents, and certainly not sitting well with Republicans. So this is going to have an effect. And there is I predict that you're going to see a lot of Latino men also engaging in this issue too, because especially those that lead their families, those that are, have daughters, that have wives, this is something that they are worried about. I have heard about it. I'm not sure it's showing up with polling, but they're worried about the fact of their family members' health could be at risk. And that that one of the things that you pride yourself as a Latino male is be able to protect your family and lead your family. And now the government is going to tell you what to do with your family should a very horrible situation arise, right? Or something, an unplanned pregnancy. All these things are being taken away. And so the fact that it's going to be on the ballot is going to drive people out to vote.
Because we are called Closing Strong. What is one thing listeners and our viewers can do to help you or to help get the vote out in Arizona?
Honestly, like, we just need to continue putting our message on TV. So if you could donate to Gallego for Arizona. Hopium has been very good on helping us out. We just need to continue pushing strong. Club for Growth just came in for a $12 million hit on me. So we want to make sure that we dominate the airwaves. And, please just keep on, getting the message out there. Go follow us on Twitter, follow us on YouTube, everything you can, and really help us get the message out, because we are here and we're going to make sure we get out every last vote we can.
And now we're going to hear from international best-selling author Liz Plank. We are so excited to have you join us on Closing Strong. Liz, I have been a very long time fan, and I'm just so excited about this conversation since there is actually a national conversation happening right now about masculinity. And
Yay.
You literally wrote the book that I love and I bought for my father a number of years ago, For the Love of Men. From toxic to a more mindful masculinity. I feel like there's like some manifestation powers in your book and in your book. I'm just really, really, really excited to have this conversation with you about the role masculinity is playing in this presidential election year that is unprecedented for so many reasons, and also just what it means to have a woman at the top of the ticket who's not running because or as or for the reason of being a woman. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I would love to hear kind of how you're experiencing this moment, 9 weeks and counting down away from Election Day.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm such a big fan too. So this is so fun. And yeah, like, it's so funny because when I started writing my book, it was actually when Trump announced that he was running. So I was covering the election for Vox and simultaneously writing this book about masculinity. And to me, 2016 was like all about masculinity, but obviously it was also about women and about gender more broadly. But I think that I was dying for more conversations around just the implications and sort of the politics of masculinity and how Trump was really using masculinity and I think traditional, and sort of, I think, unavailable or unreliable or unattainable masculinity for a lot of men in order to draw them in. And obviously, yeah, Trump now in 2024 is just, double down on that sort of strategy. It's fascinating to see, I think, the Democrats being a little bit smarter, about their messaging, a little bit smarter about how they're definitely messaging, the idea of a first woman of color, becoming president. There's a stark contrast with, I think the strategy when it comes to Hillary Clinton, the whole I'm with her, strategy. I mean, I have so many thoughts and I'm sure we'll go more into detail, but to me, it's been kind of exciting to see people openly acknowledge the way that masculinity really shapes men's views and choices and voting behavior.
Absolutely. And it's, Simon, I really want you to chime in on this as a man.
I
want to just talk about men when we have one here.
As the token guy, the token white guy here. Yeah.
Represent the entire gender, please, for us. But kind of really specifically, what's been really interesting is the stark contrast of Donald Trump and the masculinity that he projects and tries to sort of, I think, leverage with male audiences in particular, which is where he's really, really focused now, it seems, right, is younger men, where Democrats have had more trouble. And that contrast between the I'm going to say toxic masculinity that he projects and leverages with the kind of masculinity we're seeing out of Governor Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate, and also her husband, because I have started to say, as a recently divorced and single woman in my middle aged without children,
Congrats.
that I am looking for my Doug.
Love it. Yeah.
And people get it immediately when I say he's not a Doug or where's my Doug. And it's a very different kind of male projection. And it's one that I think so overdue to be celebrated and not portrayed or projected as weak. And I would love you, with your brilliant big brain on this, to just kind of expand on what you think that means. And if this is a real turning point or if it's a blip in the path to smashing the patriarchy.
Yeah, I mean, the Doug test, I think, should be like a new, yeah, like, is he Doug enough for dating? That could be a really fun challenge. But no, I think that Democrats are kind of finally offering a positive vision for masculinity. I think that for a long time, they kind of let Republicans speak directly to men and really tap into their real valid concerns and true like suffering, right? Like it's hard to be a woman in America in 2024 for obvious reasons of, our bodily autonomy is not respected in, a handful, more than a dozen states, and is at risk in, the entire country. And there are many issues that are still, that we still haven't sorted out. But it's also hard to be a guy in 2024. If we look at men's ability to provide, right? One of the most important core tenets of masculine identity, that the men certainly tell me is still important to them, is not available for most men in America. Economic prosperity, and I mean, if you again just look at the data, the average man is making less than he was making in 1969, and a lot of the gains when it comes to the economy, when it comes to economic prosperity, have been for a very select few, handful of men who are at the top. But all of those guys are being lumped into the same category as an Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk made more money than any other person on earth during the Trump years. But I don't think that your average working class or middle class, male worker felt any of that, money come into his pockets. And so I think what's happening on the Democratic side is there's a little bit more of an acknowledgement, that we need to sort of communicate, yeah, the Tim Walz sort of more populist, more sort of simple messaging about a compassionate but strong kind of masculinity, where you're introduced by a bunch of football players, but you cry with your son, over the beauty of IVF and how important that is as a right, not just for women, but for families, and include men in that conversation. Because, if you look at it, a lot of the policies on the Democratic side actually advantage men and help men in a lot of this crisis in masculinity that we're talking about. That, yeah, men have trouble providing, men have a lot of issues with mental health. When you think about death by suicide, 80% of those deaths are men. But who's cutting the programs for mental health? Who's cutting access to healthcare or making it their top priority to take down affordable healthcare? It's Republicans. But Republicans have a very popular message with men, when it comes to tapping into their feelings and into their concerns. And so I think Democrats need to step up and make sure that the message is as good as the policies for male voters.
Yeah, two things. First of all, this is such an interesting conversation, but I have two thoughts just listening to
Yeah.
you, Liz. One is, I do think that the Biden administration, by prioritizing the infrastructure bill, the IRA, the CHIPS bill, has moved incredible investments into what has traditionally been more male-oriented work, right? Construction work and manufacturing and all the things that are, the acceleration of the energy transition. The idea now that we're starting to eliminate the requirement for 4-year degrees for some jobs, that there's been a sea change in the Democratic Party's thinking, I think, about these issues that you're describing. Well, and the investments we've made are the biggest investments we've made in what is more traditionally kind of working class male work than any party has made in the last 60 years. And so I do think we have a powerful offering to take advantage of what you're describing. The second just reflection I have on listening to you talk today is that, I do think that the abortion issue has opened up a huge well of space for men to engage in these issues of reproductive health and freedom in ways that were probably not easy for us in the past. I think that the notion that we are now seeing the rights and freedoms stripped away of our sisters, our wives, our daughters, of people that we know, and that their lives have been diminished by this, I think has forced men into this conversation in a way that we probably weren't really that involved in before. And I think this is, in the short term, this has been disastrous for the country and for the women of America. But it's also opened up, I think, space for men to be better partners to the women in their lives and to fight for them and to understand the significance of this. I certainly feel that way. And I go back, if I can just make one last point, the huge kind of moment I had in this whole debate was when JD Vance was on one of those early videos of JD Vance came out, where he said that he believed that women should stay in abusive marriages for the good of the children. I will tell you, it affected me profoundly about how just batshit crazy this was and how extreme and what an unbelievable threat these guys were to the women of America, that they were promoting women should be getting beaten and sent to the hospital for the good of their kids. In what universe? And so I also have been far more engaged in this debate probably than I was otherwise because of JD Vance coming onto the scene, who I think has elevated up the threat from where Trump is to something that even feels more pernicious, more Handmaid's Tale like, right, than we could possibly believe. So I do think these are really important issues that I think are really, I agree with both of you that the Democratic Party and the role of men in the Democratic Party is changing. And I think in a very constructive and positive way.
I totally agree, and I think it's been your path, right, to see the rollback of abortion rights and see what JD Vance is saying about women, to become more involved. I think you're seeing your role as a man, right, in that fight, and even to a certain extent, it's a masculine role, right, to protect women. It's something that I think a lot of men, again, in my interviews with them, tell me that feels good to them. But I think that, yeah, there's been a group of men that have sort of gone that way. And then there's another group of men who have, I think, yeah, where there's been more of a backlash, right? And more of a discomfort with women wanting to reclaim those rights and wanting to be, sort of more empowered to speak out about this in kind of inequality. And I think what's interesting is that your generation actually seems more on board than the younger generation of young men that we're seeing. So there's a huge gender gap when it comes to the upcoming election. It's predicted to be the biggest gender gap in American history, but it's mostly actually being explained by young men really going and sort of supporting the Trump Vance ticket in a way that, like, during Obama, young people kind of you couldn't really tell. There wasn't really a big gender gap. A lot of young people supported Obama, but we're really seeing a difference here where a lot of young men are actually less feminist or less progressive than their fathers or their grandfathers were. So I think there's a real, again, that's why I'm very heartened to see the Democratic Party kind of take that threat seriously and be like, okay, we need an offering for men, right? It has to be an active, positive, story for them to be the hero of. It can't just be, well, don't be them, don't be sexist. What do you be, right? What are you going to be is probably a better way to put it. I think that's what I've been craving, and certainly seeing some men really model with their behavior. And I think what you're describing, is happening for you.
That's exactly right, that they need to see themselves in this new world where women have more equality and where we are having to fight for rights. And the backlash effect is so strong. And you brought up JD Vance, Simon. I think we have a clip that we want to play from Vance.
To me, what it is sort of a value system to replace the fact that they're all fundamentally atheist or agnostic. They have no real value system. Their only value system is achieve in a very conventional way. And so the idea that somehow they're pursuing racial or gender equity is like the value system that gives their life meaning. Well, of course, they all find that value system leads to misery, leads to unhappiness. Okay, clearly this value set has made me a miserable person who can't have kids because I already, passed the biological period when it was possible. And I live in a 1,200 square foot apartment in New York and I pay $5,000 a month for it. But I'm really better than these other people. What I'm going to do is project my racial and gender sensitivities on the rest of them.
He's talking about women without children, which is one of his favorite topics, honestly. Every time he opens his mouth, he really likes to degrade and diminish women who don't have children, whether by choice or not. Either way, it's not really okay. He just recently also came out, or there was audio leaked about him disparaging teachers who don't have children, that people who don't have children shouldn't be teachers. We know that he has come out and said that possibly people without children, their vote shouldn't weigh as much as somebody with a child. I understand that he is creating a permission structure for the men that do feel alienated and isolated and do want things to be back the way they were, with traditional gender norms that really just oppressed women financially, economically, professionally, personally, bodily, all of the different ways. But there is a backlash effect, I believe, to Vance and his strong belief system about the role women should play in society. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
There's a new headline every week, and it's sort of hard to keep track, and it's hard to when you hear a new one, you're like, oh, that's an Onion article, right? Like it's the Onion doing a spoof of what JD Vance was saying. Like, so the teacher one I did not hear. I don't know how you insult just like so many people in one sentence. I mean, beyond sort of degrading women for not having the ability or the willingness to do what he can't even do, like men can't even give birth, so to like put down women based on sort of something he can't even do is just beyond me. But I think beyond that, it's like, well, the reason why a lot of women aren't having kids, if you make a list of the policies, that make it harder for people to have kids, it's all a list of Republican policies. And if you make a list of the policies that, tend to sort of encourage or create a better environment for young people to be having kids, it's a list of Democratic policies. It's, access to childcare, affordable childcare, maybe even free childcare. Certain countries do that, and they have high rates of, they have high birth rates. There's so many different, obviously parental leave, right? Like the United States really stands in sharp contrast with the rest of the industrialized world. I mean, being Canadian, it was really what drew me actually to wanting to move here was just kind of it felt in many respects like aspects of American society were like a developing country, that these things are, quite normal in the rest of the world. And here, these are things that we don't, offer parents. And so, of course, it's harder to have kids in a, system that I think a system that JD Vance not only likes, but wants to sort of double down on, right? I think people having kids is great. I don't see any sort of issue with us, believing that we should be ensuring that young people, are given the opportunity to have the kind of family that they want. But yeah, a lot of young people can't have the families that they want. A lot of young women, want kids, but they can't. And it's mostly because of Republicans. And, not even getting into the entire abortion conversation, which, a lot of women, are not having sex with men because in certain states you could go to prison for it, So yeah, I everything that, comes out of the mouth of JD Vance is just giving more reasons for women to be afraid to have kids, and for women to see it as a liability, not just, sort of from a cultural standpoint, but from, it could be a life, changing decision, and you can die, if you don't have the appropriate health care that you need.
So they want to have it all ways, right? Like,
yeah, just like, well, then make it easier. Yeah.
Right. Demand that women have children. That's the only way that they have inherent value in our society. Give them absolutely no ability to make that easy, affordable, or sustainable to do. Chastise them after, take away all of the rights to our bodily autonomy. It's just, across the board. That's why the gender difference, I think, is so stark. But I hope far more men are quietly supporting the Harris Walz campaign than the polls are showing right now. That's my
Well, that'll be the question, because the Trump campaign is sort of doubling down on young men, and young men are not a very reliable voting demographic, and so far. And again, things could change, but I think that'll be the sort of question: is their investment going to pay off? Of going on podcasts that are definitely, I don't know, we're probably not really listening to, but they're definitely popular with young men. Are they just going to tap into their feelings? Or are they actually going to be able to get them to register to vote and actually go and vote? I think that still is remains to be seen and determined.
But Liz, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
on
you
Closing
both.
Strong. Just as a last word, what is something that is top of mind for you, for our listeners, that they could do right now if they want to get involved in the fight in this final sprint?
Well, you can join me at our next Hotties for Harris party. We also are doing all kinds of activations in swing states where we're helping people register to vote, talking to them about particularly abortion rights with this group called Vote for Abortion. And yeah, I usually try and keep everyone abreast of all of the, sort of our next stops. But also, I just encourage, again, deep canvassing obviously is always a topic of conversation sort of every election year. But I really think it's important for people to remember that, they have so much influence and so much, sort of power and more power than they realize to influence the people around them. Your dad or your, aunt is probably more likely to listen to you than to listen to a stranger or even maybe someone on their TV. And so don't underestimate, the power of deep canvassing. And yeah, I've been going to bars. I've been going to, Phillies. We went to a Phillies tailgate where I talked to men about the fact that Project 2025 wants to ban porn. Like, yes, we should talk about abortion. We should talk about all of the big talking points, but there are also so many ways that men are impacted in this election and young men are impacted that you could just talk about at a bar if you're out, and see where that conversation goes.
Thank you so much for joining us,
Liz,
Liz.
thank
For
you so
having
much.
me.
Well, that was an amazing set of conversations, Tara. I really enjoyed it. Part of the reason I've wanted to do this program with you is so I could learn. I learned a lot today, and it was a great episode. I do think some of the things that Liz talked about are really important and things that we need to figure out how to explore more in future episodes. I mean, I found that conversation to be fresh and new and really interesting. And of course, Ruben is amazing, my dear friend. But listen, I think we try to close out with a discussion about what people can do. And so, what are your thoughts about listening to this show today? What kind of recommendations do you have to people about things they could do to help us close strong?
Yeah, I mean, just given the sort of accidental theme of this whole episode, but it's one of the major themes of this election is gender. It's the gender divide and gender dynamics and how that's going to play out in vote share. I just want to repeat and reinforce Liz's call to action, which is talk to the men in your life. And especially the men that friends, family, colleagues, former classmates, whatever it is, who live in the core battleground states, because those personal interactions and conversations can make a big difference. And I don't think that there is a massive permission structure yet for men to, be feminists or even approach that word in a comfortable way. And maybe that's not the right word to use then. But I think that I like that one a lot for this week. I think just being able to have conversations with men about this election and about what's on the table and what's at stake is a good one. But what's yours, Simon?
Yeah. So listen, I think that since Dobbs, part of the whole Simon Hopium theory of the world is that since Dobbs, there's been a completely new politics in America, and that something broke inside the Republican Party. They've struggled, and we've overperformed. It supercharged our coalition, and a lot of the people who've been doing the work of our party, giving the money, writing the postcards, canvassing, have been women. I mean, the intensity that we've seen. Part of the reason we just keep winning elections is the women of America have decided that democracy is not going to slip away on their watch, and that they're outraged by the stripping of rights and freedoms away from them, and that we've seen this incredible explosion of intensity, of money, of volunteerism into the Democratic Party. And so, what I would just say is that as we all go do the work here in the final 2 months, in whatever way that you want to do the work, right? Whatever piece of this, you just got to do more, because we are winning. In my view, we are winning this election, and now we need to close strong. The most important thing is we have an advantage. We are stronger than they are. Trump is struggling and he's flailing and he's weak. And so when we're ahead like this, is the work that you do, because people are seeing Democrats as being positive. Kamala Harris's positives are very high right now. People are very open to her. Well, that's when we have to get to them. And so the work that you do, just even in the next few weeks, right? Volunteering for the Harris Walls campaign, coming to this Thursday night thing that I do every Thursday night at 7:30, where we're making calls and postcarding to key House races around the country. However you're going to do more and do now. Don't wait till mid-October and late and early November. Do it now. We need to talk to people right now. So that's my big admonition, or my big recommendation is, get in the game here, make your voice heard. People want to hear from us. Let's talk to them. And I think if we can continue to prosecute our advantage and continue to talk to voters, we're far more likely to win this election. And so this was a great show, Tara. I really enjoyed it today.
Me too, Simon. Do more, do it now. I love it.